Also wanted to show you our new website for CTA. So this was the website I was talking about yesterday with special education resources. If you scroll up, it gives you an introduction, places you can get things. Okay, that's the new special education resources booklet. It was done by the CTA IEPD department. And there shows rights and responsibilities, office hours if you need to get in touch with someone if you have questions. There's an IEP team management part 1, part 2, part 3, which is webinars. So there's webinars you can go on that might be able to assist you as well. And if you have questions about other areas, you can click and there's some PDFs for you as well. So it's a really, really, really great resource that we want you guys to know about and share through the CTA website. Next, I'm going to introduce our speaker. So Carrie Flint is an award-winning physical education teacher. She's a national presenter and author from California. She is known for her passion and advocacy for quality physical education, addressing mental illness in the school setting, and the importance of creating a safe and positive learning environment for all students. Carrie has been an educator for more than 20 years and presented numerous sessions at our CTA conferences. We are honored to have her here today to talk about her experience as a parent of a child with a hidden disability and her family's journey and fight to get her son the support he needed. Welcome, Carrie.
Thank you so much, and thank you, CTA, for asking me to share my story today. I'll let you know it's not an easy story to share, but I have chosen to share it to be helpful to you as an educator, as well as parents, and to bring awareness of situations that, even though my son, this happened a few years ago in my journey in the school district, it is relevant. It happens today. So before I dive into a little bit, as you heard that I'm a physical education teacher, I'm a teacher. I'm one of you. Yes, I am. But I'm also a parent. And I'm a parent that actually had to file due process. And I'm a parent that also had to file a federal lawsuit to fight for my son's rights and to be able to get the support and services for him. So my objective here today is to bring awareness of what parents go through, which I know many of you say we know that, and some of you are parents that attend IEPs as a parent. But what amazes me is I'm standing up here, I'm not proud that I filed due process. I'm not proud that I had to file a federal lawsuit, and quite frankly, it cost a lot of money. But I have no regrets in doing it, because I not only did it for my son, I wanted to hold the school district accountable for what they did, but also set a path for other students that are similar to my son, and aware that there are a lot of parents that don't have the means or frankly the guts to stand up to a school district and say, you need to treat my son differently. So this is not about venting. I am not going to name names and point fingers, not at all. I'm not going to name any school districts. I also am not going to share with you my son's name out of respect to him. And I want to clarify that today's story is my story. It's not my son's. It is mine as a teacher, and it is mine as a parent. It's also not secondhand information. I'm going to share a couple things that were said to me, and you're going to say, you've got to be kidding, that was said to me. But the deal is, it's not someone else's story. It was me sitting across the table from a special ed director and a district lawyer in what was said to me. But once again, I'm not mentioning my son's name, and this is not my son's story. I don't know exactly what happened at school because I'm not my son. And it would be unfair for me to assume that what was told to me is 100% correct. So it is not his story. It is mine as a mom. So, I'm an APE teacher. I've attended a lot of IEPs in my career. And what I know as an APE teacher, attending an IEP, it's a role that I fill and what my responsibilities are in that meeting. The very first IEP meeting I attended for my son was when he was in high school. So I have a lot of years and a lot of IEPs that I did not have the experience of being in the role of a parent in those meetings. What I will tell you, it is completely different. And I know many of you appreciate that statement, but in my years, some meetings are very emotional, but as an APE teacher, I didn't cry. I cried at every single meeting that I attended for my son as a parent. It absolutely is much more emotional and stressful as a role of a parent. It is an IEP meeting, and I know it's part of your job, and I know it's another meeting, and in many cases, for a lot of us, it's another meeting. But as a parent, that IEP meeting is so much more. It's your child's education, it's your child's well-being, it's your child's life. And you are investing in a team of professionals to be there to offer the best support and help so your child can be successful. It's intense. So, first IEP meeting for my son was in high school. However, behaviors always existed. I've always been asked, when did it get difficult with your son? The day he was born. And I'm very serious. It was a horrific birth. I'll save the gore, but very simply it was this. It was an emergency C-section, and what I remember of my son's birth was the doctor yelling, "We have to get the baby," to the anesthesiologist, and the anesthesiologist saying, "Well, she keeps on vomiting. I can't give her any meds." So yes, I felt them cut me to get my son. It was a very traumatic day. Now, as life moves on, he survived, that's great. But what I know now, because my son now has been diagnosed, it sort of explains all of these little things. He never slept, he had a lot of behaviors, he had a lot of tantrums that would last for hours, he was defiant. And at some time, I think we'll all agree, as we know, when they're little, his behaviors were age appropriate. But then we get to a point that those tantrums lasting for 6 hours when they're 13 and 14, not so much age appropriate anymore. But we didn't know that. And I will tell you, I didn't know what to do, and I didn't have support, and I didn't have help. All I know is that my son is behaving a certain way, so honestly, I'm a bad parent. My husband and I were bad parents. Okay, now we're dealing with bad behaviors. Well, let's try a different discipline strategy. You go through all these other things. To go to that there's possibly something more going on, you don't do that right away. You go all these other things. And then the other thing is that a lot of these major intense behaviors were at home. But with that said, there were things that happened at school. But fortunately, or I have to say, yes, a lot of teachers did like my son, which was great. And now this is the key. I am standing in front of you. My son fell through our system and didn't get help that he desperately needed for one factor. Or actually, there's two, but the first one is this. My son is smart, and he gets A's. Because of that, his behavior was dismissed. Because of that, he was denied services. Because of that. Now, as I said, issues with my son started from birth. And when he did go to school, there were issues every year from preschool up. I'll never forget one day I was teaching at a private school, the PE teacher that I am, and I had my son was at the preschool that was connected to the elementary school, and one day the preschool director brought in my son and just gave him to me. Now, mind you, I'm teaching PE. I got classes right here. I'm teaching PE. And they bring him in and she says, well, something happened. I have no clue what happened, but something happened, and so he can't be at school anymore. He needs to be with you. I'm like, I'm teaching PE. My goodness. But that's how it was dealt with. Let's just take him out and remove him. So what I remember is the fact that this all started as young as preschool. Kindergarten, first grade, there were always issues. There were always issues. I was getting phone calls, whether it was issues with students or he was upset about something. But this is a deal. It's like, okay, Carrie, you have these issues and these phone calls. How come you couldn't get help until high school? Well, what I didn't know then, but what is so important now that I need to share with you, one of the big reasons that my son fell through the cracks is that even though that there were all these instances, no teacher documented it. They didn't put it in his file. Oh, we called the parent, we let him know this has happened. And honestly, at that time, I had no idea how important documentation is. That is something that I want to pass on to you right now with your students and behavior. As minimal of an instant can be, please jot it down. Because without the documentation, there's no paper trail, there's no evidence, and it is very difficult to get help for students, as it was in my son's case. Let's jump to when I was finally able to make an effort to get help. First of all, I did talk to the teachers. I did let them know what was happening. I did let them know the struggles. And every single time, the school district came back to me and said, your son has good grades, there's nothing we can do. Now, I mentioned I'm a teacher. My husband is a retired teacher. So I worked in this school district. My husband is in this school district, and my son was in a third school district. So out of desperation, we weren't getting any help from my son's school district. I went to my district. I went to the special ed director. I went to the school psychologist, and I go, this is my situation. What can I do? My husband did the same thing in his district. Both districts asked us the same question and responded exactly the same way. What are his grades? A's. There's nothing you can do. How many of you have heard people saying they have good grades, there's nothing we can do? It happens today. It just doesn't happen back then. So here I've said, I'm not telling you any district name, it doesn't matter, but I want you to know 3 districts, high up people in the districts told us exactly the same thing. And I know some of you are saying, Carrie, you're an APE teacher, you should have known different. Yes, I should have. I take that responsibility. However, I'm an educator. I'm one of you. This is my profession. Why would I even think a school district would not tell me the truth. And mind you, it was 3 school districts that told us exactly the same thing. All right, so by 6th grade, because I did take my son to a counselor, and finally a great, wonderful, dear friend who's known my son since birth said there's something more going on with him. Take him to a psychiatrist. In 6th grade, I took him to a psychiatrist. He's diagnosed bipolar and put on meds. Now, we all know meds are a journey. It's not a magic pill. It's a combination, and we go through a journey. But the deal is that did initially help because my son would have tantrums at home that I'm not exaggerating, that would last for hours and hours and hours until his body would pass out, and then we're like, phew, okay, now he's passed out, we have a break. So, meds, every person is different, we know that. But I know in our situation, I was grateful to have something to see something different. So that was 6th grade. In 8th grade, I was so excited, my son started getting D's and F's. Yes! Yes! It gave me the window. The window of, because I was told, no help because he has good grades. Well, D's and F's, finally. I will honestly tell you, my husband and I at one time did have a discussion, do we tell Joey to start failing? We literally had that conversation. We need him to fail in order to get help. So he gets D's and F's. I put together a letter. Please evaluate my son. Now, in my letter, I not only said, please evaluate him, I let them know he's been diagnosed bipolar. Here's the name of the psychiatrist. Here are the meds he's on. He's now getting low grades. And I also am concerned of my son's safety as well as other students. So, again, I put that in writing. I went, they called me and said, we need to have a meeting. So I walk in a room, there's a school psychologist, the counselor, the principal, and 4 of his 6 teachers in this room. Again, this is my story, so I'm sharing with what was said to me. The very first thing that was said to me from the school psychologist was, we don't understand why you are here. Have you seen his test scores? And I responded, did you not read my letter? Well, but he has good test scores. We don't really understand why you're here. And everyone loves your son, and everything is fine. And I'm like, well, there's issues. And I'm getting phone calls that there are issues. And once again, you would think these things would be jotted down. For example, the day I got a phone call from the assistant principal that your son is screaming and yelling in my office. Why is that? I'm like, no, that's my son. And he goes, but I don't know why. Well, he did calm down. But what I was then told was that particular day, my son had an argument with the math teacher. This is 7th grade. And he got so upset he left the room. And then, as Murphy's Law is, there was a fire drill. And they couldn't find my son. Well, they found him and he ended up in the office. Don't you think that's a big incident? Do you think it was written in his file? I didn't know that at that time. I know now what was written in the file because of what the journey I had to take, but at that time, completely blown away that no one wrote that down. So, in this meeting, all of a sudden, when I'm sharing my feelings or what's happening with my son, the band teacher speaks up. And the band teacher says, you know, I've actually seen some of these behaviors. And then you know what's interesting? Every single person in that room had a story about my son. Everyone. But they liked my son. Oh, that's just your son. That's just how he behaves. It's not appropriate behavior. And he's not successful when he's getting suspended or he's getting in fights or issues. No teacher jotted that down, any of those incidents. So that meeting, you would think the school would do the correct thing and evaluate your son, but they told me he has good grades, so there's nothing we can do, so they didn't evaluate him. Let's go on to high school. Within the first couple months of high school, issues happened. He was being bullied, there was fights, there was things, but initially he actually wasn't the one in trouble, but they were incidents that were happening. But then an incident happened that he was in trouble, and he was suspended. Now when I went to this meeting, so now I'm not at the middle school, I am now at the high school. When I go to this meeting, I brought another letter. And basically it was the same thing. He's bipolar, he's on meds, I'm concerned of his safety, but there was one other thing that I brought to this meeting. I brought a recording of one of my son's tantrums. He's 14. Now they acknowledge, oh, that doesn't sound normal. No, it's not normal. But believe it or not, I once again was told, your son has good grades and there's nothing we can do. Again, this is my story, and I know all of you are probably in disbelief, but they did not evaluate him again because he had good grades. However, at this meeting, I at least was strong enough to stand up saying, I'm not leaving unless I have a 504. I'm not leaving with anything because I need to put a red flag on my son. Because my son is being bullied and it's an unsafe environment for my son to be here. And there's also another thing which would be a whole nother presentation. My son has been mistreated by more than one teacher. Specifically, his 4th and 5th grade teachers absolutely damaged my son. That's another presentation, but trust me, my son was not in a safe environment, not only around students, but also teachers. So I did get a 504. They agreed to that. Yes, woohoo! But I learned what a 504 was. In my case, was we had a meeting. We jot down support and services, what should be done, and to be aware of my son's behaviors. And then, I'm going to go ahead and move this because I keep going around it. There we go. That they filled out that 504. And you know what they did with it? They put it in a file. Do you think they shared anything with teachers? Do you think anything was implemented? Nothing. Unfortunately, another incident happened about 3 weeks after that. At this time, my son was suspended. And then we were requested to have a meeting because they wanted to expel my son. So at this meeting, I didn't just show up with a brand new letter. I showed up with letter number 1. I showed up with letter number 2. And I wrote a new one. And in that new one, a friend of my, an APE friend of mine, is like, Carrie, why don't you actually copy and paste the law and put it in that letter? Which I did. I also had an additional letter from his psychiatrist that stated my son's behavior were because of his bipolar disorder. You cannot expel a child because of something that happened because of their disability. Now, initially, that assistant superintendent didn't want to read the letters, but my husband decides, no, you're going to read them. And here were the options the school had for us. Ready, guys? Option 1, we want you and your husband to homeschool him. Nothing was offered to us, no recommendations, nothing. It was, we want you to homeschool him. Ready for the second option? Because we refused that one. That was not going for us. Do you have a relative that could take him? No, that option's not working either. It was a very, very difficult meeting because my husband and I adamantly refused to homeschool and made it clear that there was no one that can take our son. We need our son in school and we need our son help, and our son is mentally ill and he has a disability, and we've been trying to get help for years and no one will listen to us. So just throwing him away and expelling him is not okay. My son is a human being. And for all these years, everything's peachy keen because he can get A's. He's fine. He can get A's. My son's 24 right now. Yes, he can get an A in calculus, but that's not a life skill. I was ecstatic with the D's and F's. A child's education is not just about getting A's in reading and writing. It's the social skills, it's the coping skills, it is the communication. My son has no friends. My son struggles to keep a job. Yeah, he's smart, but he doesn't have those skills in order to survive as a human being. Now, I haven't even mentioned that I haven't gotten to a lawyer yet. That didn't happen until his sophomore year, because they did evaluate them and did agree that he's bipolar and needed help and needed support. And miraculously, there actually was a program at the school to help students like my son. So freshman year, we're finishing, and he's in a program that he has support. And when I attended those meetings, I'm just like, yes, I'm emotional, but I'm just so grateful that I have help. So at that time, I was still Carrie Flint, the mom. I was not the high-profile nightmare mother. I didn't want to become that, but unfortunately, things happened. Let's go to sophomore year. Again, I don't have a lawyer yet. Sophomore year, we get an email that my son is he's not allowed to be in certain classes. Now, I think we'll all know you can't deny a child access to classes. Or if they can't be in classes, you're to provide the support so they can be successful. So I'm not a lawyer, but I knew they can't do that. So that was one issue. He was being denied access to classes. Now, another thing that happened his sophomore year, and it's sort of interesting because it has to do with PE. And for those that are familiar with me, yes, I am Miss PE. My APE kid said, hey, it's Miss PE. That's me. This is my life. I helped write the curriculum framework for the state of California for physical education. I also helped revise the APE guidelines. Yes, this is my life. So what happened at the end of freshman year, at the IEP meeting, it was discussed of what PE class should my son be in. And what was actually recommended at the IEP, who was his English teacher, who happened to be the golf coach, recommended that this would be a great class for him. Now, if you sort of get the picture, basketball would have been a bad class. Got it? Individual sport appropriate for my son. I didn't even suggest it. Win, win, win. I'm happy with this. All is good. Beginning of the sophomore year, we're getting phone calls from my son saying, come pick me up. And my husband goes to back to school night and comes back and says, you know what? There's no golf class. And we're like, well, what? There is a golf class. There's 25 boys. There's 25 boys. There's supposed to be a golf class. So what happened, and I know this is a sidebar, but it's very important when I get to the big point, is this. The coach was off campus with the girls on the golf course, and he would just send all the boys home. Now, this wasn't 0 period, and it wasn't 7th period. It was 6th period, and it was students, 25 boys that were freshmen to senior, just sending them home. So initially, being the PE person that I am, I call the school and say, you know, you need to get a sub. If the coach is off campus, you need to get a sub. Wouldn't anybody do that for any other subject? Yes. But they didn't do it for this. Their response to me was, quote unquote, your son doesn't fit in the class. Don't ever tell a parent a kid doesn't fit. And they said it to me over and over again. Your son doesn't fit. And again, I'm being an educator, a physical educator, saying, that's not the answer. You need a teacher for this class. There's no class. Yes, it's a bigger issue. And apparently my husband and I were the only parents in this district that cared that there was no class, because there was no class for golf. So this is when I did get a lawyer, because my son is now being declined access to classes that he wants to be in, with no support being offered. My son is being told he doesn't fit in a class, which I clearly know is discriminatory and you can't do it. So that's when I got a lawyer. And at that time, when we get a lawyer, I find out a few things. The district did not do a complete evaluation as they promised. And another magical thing that I discovered, and I want everyone to think about this, is that every meeting needs to be recorded. Don't be afraid of meetings that are recorded. I know people take notes, and I know many of you yourself take notes, but you need to be honest, is that when you are writing those notes, you are self-editing what is important and what is not important. You don't ask every sentence, do you want that in the notes? Because you are being efficient. So there's nothing wrong about your notes. But the reason this issue happened about the notes that were so specific in my situation was this. I did meet with the special ed director about the golf class. And he walked into the meeting and said, the word golf is not written in the notes, so we will not have a conversation and your son will be in basketball. If that special ed director had been to that meeting, he would have discovered that not only did I not bring it up, it was the coach that brought it up, but it was about a 5-minute conversation. Whoever wrote the notes did not feel jotting down a little bit about golf, physical education, was a top priority. Now, I know all of you are saying, Carrie, you should have read the notes. Even if I had read the notes, never in my wildest dreams at the high school level, if my son is enrolled in a golf class, would think there would not be a golf class. So even if I caught those in the notes, I wouldn't do it. So that is why I'm a huge advocate to share with you when a meeting is recorded. It's not about catching a school district. It is good for both sides. You also speak differently when a meeting is recorded, and now it is best for everybody, as well as a little bit less pressure for that note taker to make sure everything is done. So I do encourage you to have a positive attitude when you go to a meeting that is recorded. So that's another little point I want to make. So, sophomore year, due process. And in that due process, we get him into those classes with the one-on-one support. That's what he needed. And when it did come down to the golf, I need to let you know this was said and understand this was a knife in my gut. The district lawyer sat across the table from me and said, we really don't understand why you're making golf an issue as part of this due process. He got an A. Exactly. There was no class, but he got an A. So God forbid the parent actually complained, like, I actually know, because I told the district, I go, I'm actually the parent that knows there's a law, and you're completely out of compliance. My son is to have 400 minutes of PE every 10 days of school. Yes, but the lawyer felt he got an A, so what's the big deal? So that's due process. That's sophomore year. Let's move on. I kept a lawyer. I needed to have a lawyer. Either the lawyer or advocate attended the meetings, because in the meetings it was quite interesting. The fact that I'm an APE teacher, I actually know how to write a goal. I also know to say you have to write a goal that is measurable, and all of you know that to go into a meeting to say a child met a goal or didn't meet a goal, what do you need? Yeah, you need that. So one meeting, one of the goals was that my son was to be observed during passing time and during lunch about his behaviors. So this goal, it's an appropriate goal. When they said, well, he met the goal because he didn't was not sent to the office. And I go, well, what were his observations? We didn't do any observations, but he didn't go to the office. Now, again, I'm an APE teacher, so I said in the meeting, I know you can't say he met the goal. You admitted you did no observations. You have no data. Oh, but he didn't go to the office. And I clearly said, if you actually wrote the goal that he didn't go to the office, then he met the goal. But you didn't write it that way. All the district would do, because I said you can't write down he met that goal. Understand, obviously you're getting the gist. We're dealing with my son's behaviors. It's not okay for them to say he met that goal when they didn't do that goal. And all the district would do is, oh, we wrote down that you disagreed. You can't say he met that goal. So even in the meetings, it was insane. Because I actually, being an APE teacher, I would sit in those meetings knowing I know you can't do that. Junior year, my son wanted to be in extracurricular activities, but he needed that support in those extracurricular activities. The district refused. Now, again, learning process in my journey, whatever is offered to general ed students has to be offered to kids with special ed. And they need to have the support recognized and identified that they needed. They refused. So this time, a meeting cost me $2,000. Why? Because I had my advocate at the meeting and I had the outside psychologist that evaluated my son that, by the way, now it wasn't just bipolar, let's throw on ADHD. Let's add to that. She came to the meeting. This meeting was to discuss his services and support that he needed to be able to participate in activities. There were about 12 people at this meeting. It was about 2 hours. It was intense. And it was everything presented, but I was excited. I'm in an IEP team. Let's discuss how we can help my son be successful so we can have a good next 2 years. After it was presented, there was no discussion. I literally sat there. There was no team discussion of what to do. The special ed director stood up, closed his computer, says, well, you wanted to talk. We let you talk, but we don't have to agree with you, and we're not giving him any support. I was in shock and did not say anything, but the psychologist that I brought stopped him and said, this child is bipolar and ADHD. It's not if something's going to happen, it is when. And I've given you a long list of support and recommendations so he can be successful. And this district just said, well, we don't have to agree. And that was done. Senior year. I won't go in complete details. However, this is when everything ended up that I had to file a federal lawsuit. Yes, there was an incident that happened freshman year. I mentioned that. They were going to expel him. We got him evaluated. He was suspended in freshman year. We get a phone call, or I have to say I get a phone call, that the principal said, your son's doing great in this class. He's got a one-on-one and everything's doing great. His one-on-one called me, your son's doing great. Special ed teacher. So I was aware my son is being successful in this one particular class. But I get this phone call from the principal and said, well, I just need to let you know that there's a student that's upset that he's in the class. Because of this particular student being upset, the school district responded by suspending my son a second time for what he did his freshman year. He did nothing his senior year. That's when everything exploded. I ultimately had to pull my son from the school and put him in a private school. Now, before any of this happened, we did go to the school and say, can we have another school option? Can we have any other options? Can we do anything? And the school did not offer anything. We put him in a private school, and ultimately the reason that I had to file the federal lawsuit was because that they suspended him a second time. He did not do anything his senior year. He was being truly disrespected and violated his rights because they were pulling him and questioning him, even though we said, we have lawyers, you can't just pull my son. And it got to a point that the lawyer says, you have to get him out of that school. The district not only would not pay for the private school, and that's why we had to file a federal lawsuit. You know, remember his file? Oh, you know what I did want to say? I told you how important it is about documentation. When we did file the due process, there was some evidence in his file, thanks to his middle school PE teacher. He is the only one that documented incidents that happened that gave us the evidence to say that my son's behavior was affecting his education. Thank Rick Crump, my friend, who's actually known my son since birth, but he actually did his job. He documented behavior. That was what gave us a case. That one teacher. You can be that one teacher. You can make a difference. And thank goodness this PE teacher wrote down incidents. The other thing I also want to say during due process, I don't know if anyone's ever been in mediation. You're in one room, they're in another room, and a mediator goes back and forth, and you have no idea what's being said in each room. But during that mediation, his sophomore year, this judge / mediator looked at me and said, "What took your husband and you so long to do this?" My lawyer said, "Well, it's costing her a lot of money." And then I responded with, "My husband and I are teachers. Being in this position is horrible, and I can't believe that we're in this position." Now, that was just with the due process. So when it came to the lawsuit, again, we ended up doing a mediation in one room and the other room. 6 hours. Back and forth, back and forth, back and forth. Now here I'm just going to share a little bit about me, how naive I am. Mediator comes in and says, "All right, the district will make a deal with you since you went to court and made a deal with the judge." I go, "What did I do?" "Oh, well, you went to court and made a deal for your son with the judge." I go, "No, I didn't. There was no court. There was no judge. There was no deal." The mediator literally sat across the table and says, "Oh, well, they'll prove it." I go, I didn't go to court. I don't know. This didn't happen." My lawyer is sitting there saying, "The mother knows whether she took her son to court or not." He still didn't believe her. Yes, I had another lawyer, and the universe was beautiful because we picked up the phone and she was there to be able to tell this mediator what the district had just told him were complete lies. So what I've learned in my naive little life, people can say anything, and you know what? The burden's on me to prove that they're lying. It was a horrific, horrific experience. I also want to remind everybody or to let you know, yes, sometimes districts do pay for lawyers, but not all, and not in all cases. My father passed away in 2017, and my last conversation with him was, do not give up on your son. Every dime that my father left me went to lawyers to fight for my son. I have no regrets fighting for my son. I would have had regrets if I didn't. The district absolutely pushed me to no other choice. We tried to negotiate. We asked for another school. We asked for support. We asked for alternative options for classes. No, 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 no. I literally was put with my back against the wall. Some parents don't have the money, as well as what districts do, because I felt it. They were pushing me for me to say, oh well. They kept pushing me. Now, the reason that we did settle, because we sat in that room, and I want you to know, I'm not with any money. I'm out money. Only thing I did get was to pay for the private school. Okay, I'm not sitting here with any money. But the only reason that we did not take that step to make that whole process was because my lawyer goes, this is the deal. Again, I'm learning. Did you know, or I didn't know, when it's a federal lawsuit, it goes to court, you may be lucky to have a judge that has experience in that line of law. But if you don't, it's not going to work well. And what happened was right the day before, the mediator was very honest, and he goes, I should have won a case yesterday. The only reason I did not lose this case is because the judge did not have this experience in education law. And because of that, it was too much of a risk. There was one other reason we didn't do it. Because part of that due process, remember letter 1, letter 2, letter 3, that was settled with the due process. Once you settle that, you can't bring it back for another case. If we had that, we would have 100% have had an amazing case at the federal level. But that is why we settled. I fought for my son because I fought for other students like my son. I hear it far too often that they have good grades, there's no support, there's no any help. Kids like my son desperately needed help. I shared a little bit the struggles that he has right now. And I will also share with you, I know as a teacher, kids move on. They move on, they graduate. What happened to my son is affected him to this day. He's 24. He still lives at home. But I honestly I am afraid of him. Because of his bipolar disorder and his ADHD, and I'm his mom, he's taken out everything on me for all these years. So at this current time, I actually don't live at home. I fortunately have a cabin and I live in a second house because I don't feel safe. Now I know all of you are like, oh, we'll just kick him out, he's 24. No, that's not going to help him, and he doesn't have the skills to be able to survive. And I know he's 24, this is the other thing, is he's an adult. Our hands are tied. Yes, there's resources out there and there's support. There are wonderful things, but since he's an adult, I can't force him to take meds. I can't force him to go see a psychiatrist and get support. I can't do any of those things, but he's my son. Students graduate and move on, but you know what? My son will never graduate from me. I am sharing my story, and hopefully got a couple things across. Even students with good grades need help. And education is not just academic. If you see kids like my son that need that support, speak up. Because I want you to know, maybe, I will never know, but maybe if my son had gotten help in elementary school, maybe he would be doing better right now. But what I do know is he didn't get help. That's what I do know. And I do know he was mistreated, and I do know he was never taught the skills, no matter how hard I tried and did what I did. But you can make a difference. If it's as simple as just jotting something down, having that little bit of evidence, which I am grateful for that PE teacher, that he did his job and jotted it down. I truly appreciate letting me share my story, that it's not easy and it's painful, and I don't wish this on anybody. But I am grateful and I am proud of myself that I stood up to a school district and held them accountable for what they did because it was not right. For example, I did say a statement, you're not giving my son support to be in these activities. What if my son was deaf and he was getting A's? Would you not have an interpreter there? And their answer to me is like, oh, that's different. How is it different? Disabilities are identified, and disabilities, there are resources and there are support. My son needed those things that do exist. That's the other thing. This stuff exists. But he was denied services solely because he got A's. I want to thank you very much for listening to my story, and I hope I helped to bring awareness to kids like my son, as well as what you can do as an educator. So thank you very much. Thank you. Thank you.